Dear reader, I'm Tony and this is Book Text. Today I'm going to wrap up my January reading for you, but first, our word for the day is muscose. It's an adjective. It's actually an obsolete botanical term meaning moss-like. So you might describe an unusual plant or an unusual rock even as muscose. Very cool. I love the idea of moss. It's beautiful. It's kind of fun. I don't get a lot here, so I want there to be more muscose things in my life. All right, so I read 12 books in January, and the first was actually a short story that I read for free on Tor.com. It was The Martian in the Wood by Stephen Baxter. So this was the story that kind of continues the War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. And I really liked returning to that setting, exploring a world after defeating alien invaders. And I enjoyed the plot. I enjoyed kind of Baxter's take on Victorian women and some of the really fascinating characters that he developed through the story. I also really enjoyed the alien that is in the story. And I won't tell you too much, but I found myself empathizing with the Martian in the wood. So I gave that one 4 stars. The second book I read was 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. This is a short nonfiction story I've talked about on this channel before, but it is a series of letters between an American writer and a British bookseller between the 50s and 60s. So it's a 20-year correspondence, basically. And I found myself realizing how unread I am by these really amazing books that they're talking about, very antique books, even ancient classical literature. And I also identified with Helene, who is the American writer in the story, that her friends were really distant from her. And I understand that, even though my friends might be in the next town over, I can't see them in person. So I really enjoyed reading this book, again, with new eyes. 5 stars. I also read a religious book. I read For Times of Trouble, Spiritual Solace from the Psalms by Jeffrey R. Holland. So Holland is an apostle in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he was also in the 80s the president of the university where I currently teach. So he has been a dean of religious education. He does a lot of religious writing. And this is basically just his personal reflections on the Psalms. And I really enjoyed kind of pairing this with a study of the Psalms and found a lot of personal solace. So I appreciated this book and I gave it 4 stars. A book that I finished in January but started in December was 13 Guests by Jefferson Farjeon. This is a mystery. It's a closed circle. So there's a hunting party that's been gathered to this manor estate, and a couple of dead bodies, of course, show up. I really enjoyed the deep explorations into characters. You get to know a lot of their psyche, a lot of kind of what's going on in their backgrounds. There's still a lot of mystery about them, which I appreciated, knowing a lot, but also feeling like I know nothing about them. There was definitely some dark humor. I loved the reveal, kind of how the mystery unfolded. I thought this was a great murder mystery. I ranked it 5 stars, and I would put it amongst Agatha Christie's writing. It was Golden Age, and it deserves to be acknowledged a little bit more than it is. Then I listened to an audiobook called Alphabet Squadron by Alexander Freed. This is a Star Wars novel. I'm trying to read more space opera, and I love Star Wars. It is totally new plots and new characters, though, so it's not based on any of the movies. It is set just after, a few years after Return of the Jedi. So technically, the Empire has been defeated, but there are Imperial remnants kind of floating through the galaxy and courting chaos. So this story follows an eclectic group of pilots in the New Republic. So they were rebels, and now they're the New Republic. And they have really interesting backgrounds, very complicated relationships with one another. And it was just a really fun story. I wanted to read it because it's set at the same time as the Mandalorian TV series. And The Mandalorian has been pulling from a lot of different sources to develop characters and plots and so on. So I wanted to be familiar with this source in case they use anything from it. But it's delightful on its own as well. So I gave Alphabet Squadron 4 stars. I also read this month A Winter Away by Elizabeth Fair. So this was written in the 50s, and it follows Maud, who is a young woman with a really overbearing stepmother. And she goes away to spend the winter with some family members in a kind of a remote country village. And she starts working as a secretary for an older man who's quite eccentric. She helps him to catalog his library. She meets his son. She meets his estranged nephew. And let's just say that there's a lot of romance. There's a little bit of mystery. There's a lot of humor. So funny. This book was very quirky and funny. There's a character who is actively trying to sabotage Maud, which I thought was hilarious. And she thinks she's being sneaky, but everyone knows what's going on. So I really enjoyed this. It reminded me a lot of Angela Thirkell's writing. So I gave this one 4 stars. Another wintry book I read was A Week in Winter by Maeve Binchy. This is a more contemporary novel. It focuses on a guest house called Stonehouse in Ireland, on the coast of Ireland. And it follows a group of characters who are kind of drawn for different reasons to Stonehouse to stay on its opening week. And they have these really dark, tragic stories behind them. And they find that they're able to kind of unburden themselves in this almost magical place. And they start to, develop better relationships. Sometimes even their dreams come true. It was quite sentimental, but not getting into cheesiness. So I really enjoyed this book. It was very heartwarming. It made me want to keep reading more Maeve Binchy, and I gave this one 5 stars. So this year I'm doing a Thomas Hardy project where I'm reading one Thomas Hardy book a month. And the read for January was Desperate Remedies. This was his first published work, and it is a sensation novel. I did not think that Thomas Hardy was a sensation novelist, but this is a sensation novel. There's a lot of secrets, mystery, almost thriller. There's a chase scene. It's very interesting. It follows a young woman named Cytherea, who is, being courted by 2 different men. Thomas Hardy loves love triangles, and it was really interesting. I couldn't stop reading, so I actually read it a lot faster than I meant to, and then was left wanting to start the next Thomas Hardy because it was so good. Really beautiful settings, interesting scenes. In the discussion group, people were talking about an iconic seduction scene, and I'm not sure what they were talking about. There was a scene with a piano, and I think that maybe they were talking about that scene, but regardless, it was amazing. I did give it 4 stars. I've read better Victorian books, but it was up there. It was really good. For a translated work, I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, translated from the Japanese by Jeffrey Trousselant. And this is the story of basically a magical cafe. And there is a chair, and if you sit in the chair and they perform a certain ritual, you can travel back to a moment in time. You can only spend as much time there as the coffee stays warm. So once the coffee gets cold, you have to return. Also, there's a lot of rules. So one of the rules is that nothing in the present can change, but people can change. And I think that's one of the beauties of this book. It didn't kind of grab me from the beginning, but it started getting going from there. After the first story, it really sped along, and I enjoyed this book. I maybe cried a little bit, and no, just a lot. I cried a lot. So this was 4 stars for me. For some career development, I read What Works at Work, How to Win the First 5 Years of Your Career by Daniel Hogan. There wasn't a lot of new information in here, but I did take some notes on things that what I think were particularly useful, like how to network better, how to participate in meetings better, just kind of like goals that I want to achieve in my career. There were some things that I disagreed with. There were things that were applicable to me as not someone working in business, but working in education. But I did think that it would apply to being professional as a graduate student. And I'm hoping to start another graduate program at the end of this year. So I think this will be some handy for that, but I gave it 3 stars. Another translated work for me was Ragnar Jonasson's Snowblind, translated from Icelandic by Quentin Bates. This is a mystery thriller set in a remote, isolated fishing village in northern Iceland. And it features a police novice. So the main character has just graduated from the police academy. This is his first job. And he is having a lot of personal turmoil. He is an orphan. He's having kind of a strained relationship with his girlfriend. And he feels claustrophobic in this village because they're so isolated, especially in the winter when there's an avalanche that kind of covers the road. They can't escape, they can't leave. And of course, people start dying during this time, and so he has to investigate. I loved this story. It's the first in the series, and I definitely want to continue with it. It was dark, gruesome, but very feeling. There was a lot of good feeling. I would almost compare it to Louise Penny in kind of the depth of the character development. So I really appreciated and enjoyed it. I didn't feel claustrophobic, interestingly, reading this. I felt cozy. So I guess it depends on how much you like to be kind of isolated from everyone else. But I gave this one 4 stars. I finished the month by reading Village School by Miss Reed. So this is the story of a schoolmistress in 50s and 60s in a small English country town. And it just follows her through a year of school from fall term, spring term, and summer term, I think is what they're called. I'm sorry, Christmas term, spring term, and summer term. And there's some really fun characters. It felt very similar to Anne of Green Gables or The Country of the Pointed Firs, where there's some kind of quirky, unusual characters in this town that you learn to love for their quirks. There's some fun school events that are just vintage now. We don't do them anymore. So it was kind of fun to return to a little bit more of an idyllic school time. Certainly there are things in here that are not ideal that happen, but it was really fun for me to step out of my time period and see what it was like to go to school or to teach school in a different era. I really loved this, and I gave it 4 stars. It's the first in her Fairacre series, and I will definitely be continuing on. Okay, those are my books for January 2021. Tell me, what did you read? Have you read any of these books, and did you have similar thoughts or contrary thoughts? Contrary thoughts. Tell me in the comments. And remember, there's always another book